December 14th, 2022. The day Nothing Forever, an AI-generated, viewer-directed Seinfeld clone, began streaming on Twitch. And true to its name, it didn't stop until it was banned for procedurally generated bigotry, which seems to happen a lot with AI stuff. While the machine learning technology behind the series is technically quite impressive in its ability to simulate almost coherent, mundane conversations, ChatGPT clearly hasn't quite learned what a joke is yet. Nonetheless, Nothing Forever's AI does deploy laugh tracks with the exact same accuracy as Big Bang Theory, and has been hailed in certain online circles as a surreal anti-funny parody of what happens to TV shows when they refuse to end. Those circles, distressingly, do not seem to include the creators of Nothing Forever, who, by their own account, see this thing as the first experimental step toward, quote, a show that can generate entertaining content forever, because that's truly where we see the future emerging towards. According to them, at any point, you're going to be able to turn on the future equivalent of Netflix and watch a show perpetually, non-stop, as much as you want. You don't just have 7 seasons of a show, you have 700 or infinite seasons of a show that has fresh content whenever you want it. This terrible idea has been roundly mocked by everyone with even the slightest shred of taste on the internet. Nonetheless, there is an endlessly horrified part of me that worries they might be right, that the future they've envisioned is already most of the way here, and enough people have been conditioned to want it that the only way to stop it would be to go back in time. So, let's do that.
You know, we're living in a society!
November 1st, 1988. The day Earth lost her mightiest warrior, Son Goku, to an even mightier warrior from another planet who was his surprise older brother. A tragic day indeed, especially for Goku's surprise son Gohan, but not that tragic in the grand scheme of things. I mean, the show's got magic wish balls that can bring any dead person back to life once. They're right there in the title, so the whole thing was really just a slightly convoluted setup for our hero to hit the afterlife for a training arc with an even godlier god than the one who trained him to beat the Demon King, returning just in time to save the Earth from another, stronger evil Goku from space. Also, as it turned out, the aforementioned Demon King was an alien too, as was that less godly god who gave birth to the Demon King asexually, like a frog. So, when the Prince of all Gokus kills the reborn Demon King, but he's good now, that sets up an arc where they have to go to his home planet and use some even better magic wish balls that can grant the same wish multiple times to bring him and their magic wish balls back, plus beat up an evil space real estate tycoon and his evil wannabe Power Rangers. But that arc, in turn, ended with the destruction of the other, better magic wish balls, meaning if Goku died again, he'd be dead for realsies. And the engines on the spaceship that brought him home weren't even cold yet when that very thing came to pass. A year later, from a heart disease which caused most of humanity to be wiped out by evil androids when Goku couldn't stop them, as we learned from a guy who just used a time machine to deliver him some heart pills so all that wouldn't happen. Also, that guy was secretly the son of Shadow the Goku, who's turned good now. Still, he was only staving off the inevitable. That time machine also inadvertently brought back a much bigger threat from the future, which Goku would eventually need to sacrifice his own life to stop, at long last accepting that he couldn't be the world's strongest forever, and passing the torch to Gohan, who, unknowingly, had already surpassed his father through their adventures. Though he would defend Earth in his own way, taking up the mantle of a masked superhero to fulfill his duty while still living a normal life like his mom always wanted for him. A fitting, dare I say, poetic ending to a story that kicked off with our hero picking up a torch left by his own recently departed father figure. But then, in a stunning twist, the manga and anime were still making just So much money, so Goku got to meet an even godlier super god who gave him a get-out-of-death-free day pass to come back and fight in the world tournament with all his friends and family one last time, but then that was interrupted by a maniacal space wizard trying to resurrect a giant evil magic baby sealed within the earth. Then a lot of war happened, Shadow the Goku turned evil again and then turned good again, an even godlier super-duper god showed up, dudes started fusing with other dudes, then fusing in a different way, and the evil baby split up and fused a bunch of times, then got swole, then small, but the small one was actually the scariest of them all. And then Goku saved the day by pressing the save the day button he got in his first afterlife training arc, earning a permanent, indefinite extension on his day pass, and the small evil baby was reincarnated as a nice Indian guy who Goku got to fight in another world tournament, but also his now good fat baby half was still alive and gay married to a pro wrestler. It was at this point that series creator Akira Toriyama left the franchise over creative differences with Shueisha and Toei Animation. His creativity was totally burned out, and he figured he'd made enough money by now, whereas they didn't believe in the concept of enough money. So Goku was turned back into a kid by a secret third set of magic wish balls that are even better than the even better ones, but also destroy the planet when you use them unless you go on a fetch quest, which feels like a very on-the-nose metaphor, but I suspect was just a result of Kid Goku being easier and more fun to animate. Either way, fans didn't really like that, so they made him turn back into an adult when he goes Super Saiyan, but fans still didn't like it, a lot. So after a year and a bit of trying and failing to make it work, they just sort of gave up and wrote a rushed ending that, conceptually at least, ties it all together a lot better than the Buu Saga did by at least finally creating some consequences for solving all your problems with magic wish balls, but that's just like my opinion, man. And again, I'm only talking about the structure, not, the quality of the writing, because that was pretty dog shit in GT. And still, nowhere near as good as the Cell Saga ending with a Saiyaman epilogue would have been. Anyway, while Goku may not have been formally dead at that point, the story of Dragon Ball well and truly was. For a decade and a half or so, until some of the professional corpse desecrators in Hollywood dug it back up to do their thing, and the shock of seeing that thing was so great, it actually brought the creative spark back to Toriyama's eyes. Not nearly as much as was there when he started, but enough to write a pretty good, better than Boo at least, movie every 3 years or so, introducing death gods to the Dragon Ball universe, bringing back Frieza, and reworking the movie-only character Broly to not be terrible anymore. But that, in turn, put the cartoon yen signs back in Toei and Shueisha's eyes, more than enough for them to put out a not very good TV episode every week or so from 2015 to 2018, collectively titled Dragon Ball Super, in which Goku, now officially the strongest dude in the whole universe, has to fight all the same villains from those pretty good movies, but way slower this time, plus, in between them, such stunningly creative enemies as the strongest guy from a parallel universe, and Goku from the future, but he's evil now. And if you think that's creatively bankrupt, wait till you hear about Super Dragon Ball Heroes, not to be confused with Dragon Ball Superhero, the most recent pretty good movie, a series of 8-minute web-only gacha game commercials that's been running since DB Super ended, in which the franchise owners use the established plot devices of parallel universes and time travel to stage a series of wrestling matches between Goku and other different Gokus, plus some Vegetas sometimes, and anyone else from all the other Dragon Ball things who's even remotely marketable. While there are definitely some good things about this new non-video game Dragon Ball revival era, exactly 4 good things totaling about 6 hours of runtime, when you look at it as a whole, the noise-to-signal ratio of all this new content is, frankly, just depressing. An endless loop of fights and training arcs and fights and training arcs that almost makes me miss the barely sensical MacGuffin hunting adventures of GT. And it only gets more depressing when you realize that by now, nearly half of all the Dragon Ball anime episodes that have ever been produced are of Buu Saga quality or lower. As much as anything it's ever been, this is what Dragon Ball is now. Without an endpoint, without a clear reason for the characters to keep speaking beyond the paying audience's demand to hear them talk, all stories eventually lose all meaning. Instead of helping us understand and overcome our own struggles by offering a new perspective on them, they become nothing but a mind-numbing distraction that traps us in repetitious ways of thinking and prevents us from doing anything about those problems, consuming ever more seconds of our precious and irreplaceable time on Earth in exchange for ever-dwindling returns, at most helping us get through it, but never over it. A story that never ends is a horrifying prospect indeed. Now, as a counterpoint to that, you might point to the widely beloved 80s fantasy classic, The Neverending Story, a movie about a young boy who finds solace after his mother's death in a world of living fiction called Fantastica, eventually overcoming a sinister force representing the emptiness of loss and an inability to believe in fiction, and emerging stronger for his imaginary experience, with the book and its story carrying on through all time after that, so they can help countless other sad and lost children across the ages, as they presumably have since time immemorial. Or that was the implication until the film appropriately spawned some sequels, and eventually a whole Canadian TV show, allowing many a child to spend countless hours away from our problems in the dreamy land of Fantastica, myself included. So, how can I say that such an experience is fundamentally bad for us? Because that's the entire point of the Neverending Story, actually. In the original German novel, the book and Fantastica are this sort of psychic parasite that fulfills people's wishes and makes them feel special in exchange for consuming their memories and turning them into empty, motivationless husks of their former selves. In the original text, Bastian Bux isn't special, he's not the chosen one, he's just the latest in an uncountably long line of the book's victims who are now trapped in a state of eternal, anonymous, meaningless stagnation within its endless pages, lured in by the siren song of heroism and glory. Sure, the pain that drove them away from the real world is gone, but everything else that makes them them has been taken along with it. And while Bastian does escape that fate in the end, the story concludes with the suggestion that you, the reader, may be next. And if not, then surely someone else in due time. The Neverending Story, in its original form, is a cautionary tale about both the power and the dangers of escapism and belief, but the film version just casually chucks out all of that messy, uncomfortable meaning to make it more palatable to an American audience that only wants to be sedated in its time off work or school. Financially speaking, an unquestionably good call. Morally and artistically, though? Author Michael Ende has called the movie revolting, and despite my deep-rooted nostalgia for it, now that I know how the book ends, I'm hard-pressed to disagree. The movie takes a story that intentionally appeals to one of our most self-destructive, addictive impulses and replaces the subversive part meant to help us overcome that with a call to action to take another hit. It's the film equivalent of going to a detox center and replacing all the methadone with heroin. It's just fundamentally evil shit, even if the folks you're serving it up to say, "Thank you, sir, may I have another," in the moment. And they almost certainly will. Human beings, as a rule, do not like it when things end, which sucks for us because everything has to eventually. I'm not being philosophical when I say that. I mean, literally, it all has to. Entropy is a fundamental, inescapable rule of our physical reality that will one day claim even things as seemingly eternal as the sun in the sky or the ground beneath our feet. But fiction, especially television, offers us an escape from that reality, and many other unpleasant ones, letting us live in worlds where good always rises to meet the threat of evil, any problem can be solved in a tight half hour, our minds carry on after death, just waiting to be wished back, and we never have to move out and say goodbye to the quirky yellow family down the street or the endearingly psychotic folks in the New York apartment next door. There's a comfort knowing you can flick on the TV at any point and the same old friends you've known for over a decade now will still be there. Until, inevitably, they're not, because the money ran out and they stopped making new episodes, or the extremely talented actors on the project kept growing out of their place in it, or, alternatively, you make the choice to leave because those quirky yellow friends of yours have been slowly transformed by market forces and exhausted writers running out of places to go into cartoon parodies of the cartoon parodies they started as. Unable to escape the tide of merchandising momentum pulling them ever onward into an increasingly unrecognizable future, with their only genuinely funny joke left to tell being about that very fate. We like to think we come to anime to get away from that kind of cynical, repetitive corporate Hollywood bullshit for real stories that really mean something and don't coddle their audiences, but do we? Or are we just looking for a different, more exotic flavor of the same thing? I mean, if you look at the anime that's historically been the most popular and consistently profitable, sure, Demon Slayer made waves by paring down and optimizing the shonen formula to a tight 100 chapters, and Hiroaka got where it was going eventually, but Naruto made kajillions milking that formula for all it was worth, and it even has its own version of Dragon Ball Super now in Boruto, which started running with its hands behind its back as soon as the original stopped, and shows little signs of slowing down anytime soon. Ash Ketchum was a 10-year-old kid trying to win just one tournament for like a quarter of a century. Then there's Detective Conan, ostensibly a story about how horrifying and inconvenient it would be for an accomplished teenager with a girlfriend to be turned back into a little kid, that hasn't actually done anything about its protagonist being stuck like that for even longer than Pokemon has existed. Of course, I'm not coming down on all long-form narratives. One Piece has been driving toward a clear and consistent goal for almost as long as Conan and Pokemon, always moving forward and always finding something new to say about and with its characters and world every step of that journey. Lord of the Rings takes 3 ages to get where it's going, but its meaning would be far lesser if you took out any part of that journey, even the boring bits where they're just sort of eating snacks. The way the Expanse's universe expands in scope from book to book, from claustrophobic alien-esque horror all the way up to a sweeping space opera about intergalactic empires, really needs to be read to believed. And as I said in my Bleach video, I'm a big fan of the Stormlight Archives, which are only 4 500,000-word novels into a planned series of 10. It is entirely possible to create a world and story that someone can spend a significant chunk of their life immersed in and still come out the other side richer for it, with a broader perspective on life. But it takes a lot of careful planning and a firm grasp on your intentions to create something like that without letting it devolve into an endless forever piece that just generates money. And the funny thing is, if you talk to someone who's already sunk months of their life into watching Dragon Ball or Naruto or The Simpsons or Family Guy about how good One Piece is, there's a good chance they'll tell you they just ain't got the time for it. And the argument that, no, it's actually building toward an ending and everything matters rarely convinces them to give it a go, because if you'll permit me to speculate for a second, I think the very fact that it is building toward an ending, that it expects them to invest so much into the world and characters just so they can say goodbye at the end, might be the most intimidating thing about One Piece. I mean, I've seen the same response to much more finite media. Multiple commenters on my Mob Psycho 100 retrospective have told me they've held off on finishing the series simply because they don't want it to end, even if that means leaving Mob hanging forever on the cusp of self-actualization. And it's hardly an uncommon sentiment. I have a very good anime YouTube friend who loves Ghibli movies more than almost anything else, but has intentionally held off on watching the only one he hasn't seen yet for years, solely for the comfort of knowing there'd still be some new Miyazaki magic out there for him. I'm not going to name names because I don't want anyone to feel bad, but I'm sure that me bringing that up will prompt plenty of comments from those of you who've done something similar, putting off an anime or manga or game simply because you don't want to say goodbye to it. So if anybody doubts that that's a thing that happens, just scroll down and you'll see what I mean. And I get that. Hell, I used to do that, but I stopped doing it when I realized that whether or not I let my favorite stories end, mine will eventually. Probably a lot less eventually than I'd like it to, and with very little warning. So if I don't say my own farewell to my favorite characters and worlds before then, I mean, they're definitely not going to do the same for me, what with how they're fictional and all. So I started finishing things that I'd put off for ages, and conversely made a conscious choice to stop going with stories that I felt had reached their natural endpoints, like The Simpsons or every new Dragon Ball thing aside from the movies. If I do find myself craving more of those things, instead of seeking out the new, weaker filler, I'll just go back to the old good stuff to see what new meaning I can derive from it on a second viewing with deeper analysis. And when I go back to reread Dragon Ball, I honestly waffle between carrying on through the Buu saga or just letting it end where the abridged boys did. I think they made the right call. Not only have I found this approach, gives me a lot more time to actually live my life and experience way more cool new stories that the old me might never have gotten to, and actually get to the end of them. Not only does it give me a deeper appreciation for the ones that do compel me to come back, saying goodbye to all those old faves, being content to live with the memories instead of trying to recapture that fresh first-time feeling I can never get back, has made me a lot more comfortable with accepting the endpoints that will inevitably come in all the real stories I'm living off the screen. Fiction isn't just an escape vehicle from reality. It's a mental tool we can use to simulate, analyze, and confront different aspects of reality in a safe, consequence-free context. I'd argue it's the single most powerful tool we as a species have at our disposal, as it's what's allowed us to invent all the others. But it's only useful if we make use of it. If we learn to separate the fiction from the reality, take what we need from stories, like the perspective of their creators, the reflections they prompt within us, or techniques we can apply to our own art, and learn to put them down when we're not getting anything more out of them. If we don't, the stories we're told might end up using us instead, milking our fear of finality to keep us hooked on an endless drip feed of plot turns and revelations that always seems to bring us back to the same hollow place, eating away at our existence minute by minute to fuel their own endless stagnation, and, in the worst cases, warping how we view reality itself until we're incapable of functioning within it, clinging so tight to comfortable lies that we reject obviously useful truths alongside the inconvenient ones and leave ourselves open to manipulation, which is another thing the original Neverending Story touched on. That's what the werewolf guy represents. But you can start taking charge of the stories you take in and the story you're writing for yourself. All you gotta do is learn how to let Goku die. And please, please do it before the robots take over television. I'm Geoff Thew, professional escapist, still working up the courage to eventually touch some grass someday, maybe.